Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of the BioSlife Franchise Product Training Call. My name is Dr. Peter Verdegam, and I am the Chief Science Officer of Unicity International. First, let me explain a little bit about what Cognoblend is for, Cognoblend Advanced Formula. Obviously, it has to do with cognition. Cognition is very important in our everyday life. It talks about the brightness we have. It talks about our alertness. It means a little bit about how we deal with information from our surroundings. But it also has to do with memory and memory loss, memory impairment, and eventually into very serious diseases like Alzheimer's disease. That is the product, the Cognoblend Advanced Formula. That is where we talk about when we think about this product. Let me explain a little bit about how the brain works, and particularly how memory is being processed in the brain. Let me explain to you in a simple way what it means. Our brain, of course, is a big database of information. It has to process a lot of information coming in, which we pick up on our sensory system, and it has to process that information in a certain way that makes us act on that information. That's one way the brain functions. The other way is our brain is a database of information that is stored. It can be stored for a short term or stored for a long term. And we all know that different persons can have a problem with memory. Particularly short-term memory would be a thing that would be declining initially for many people when they age. Now, how does this work? Well, I don't go into details about the biochemical and mechanistic effects of memory and brain functioning, but as you can imagine, a lot of information has to float through the database, has to go from one cell to another, has to be processed at a different spot in the brain. And this is all mediated by our nerve cells. Nerves are specific cells that are equipped to transfer packets of information through our body. They function, of course, when somebody hits our toe with a hammer, we have a pain sensation, and that pain impulse is going to travel through nerve cells to reach our brain. That's one way how nerves transport information. Another example would be the optic nerve. The optic nerve is a nerve connecting the brain to the retina in the eye. And if we see something, that means our retina is being stimulated by photons from the light, and that information then has to travel through the nerve cells to reach the brain. But within the brain, there's also a lot of nerve cells present because, information has to travel from one part of the brain to another part of the brain. Important to realize, let me explain a little bit how a nerve cell works. What are the principal components of a nerve cell? A nerve cell has a cell body, like any cell, but it's not a round-shaped cell like the normal cell in our body. It actually has long extensions, long arms, if you may. There are long arms reaching to different parts of the body. In fact, the nerve cells that transport the pain from hitting our toe with a hammer to the brain is almost one cell, or maybe two or three. It's not that there are a huge amount of cells connecting to get that information to the brain. No, the nerve cells have very long arms, and we call those arms dendrites. Now, what happens when one nerve cell has to talk to another, as happens every day, particularly in our brain? Well, information is traveling in the form of electrical impulses through those arms, through those dendrites. When that packet of information reaches the end of a dendrite, it has to be transferred, that information, to the next nerve cell. And there's a connection taking place. There's a junction between two nerve cells. And that is a very important process because that determines that the efficiency of that transfer of information from one cell to the next determines basically how well our brain functions and how well our memory may function. We may have a particular information present in our brain, but if the transformation from that information from one nerve cell to the other does not optimally function, we would basically not be able to use that information. And that describes memory loss, the inability to use information which is basically there, but which cannot be pulled out from the database. So how does the transfer of information work between one nerve cell and the other? Well, this all has to do with what we call the synaptic cleft. Now, sounds difficult, but what it basically is the end of one nerve cell and the end of one of the arms, one end of the dendrites, that's what we call a synaptic end. That's just a term of how it is named, a synaptic end. And then there is a little cleft between two nerve cell arms, and that cleft is called the synaptic cleft. Now, information is traveling across that synaptic cleft, and how does that work? Well, imagine a a packet of information is coming through the nerve cell, reaches the end, the synaptic end, and at that moment, there are little enzymes there that produce molecules that we know as neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are molecules that, the word says it, transmit so transmit information, nerve information. These are little molecules that are being produced at the end of the first nerve cell. And they basically swim across the synaptic cleft. They just, cross the synaptic cleft and go to the other side of the cleft, reaching the second nerve cell. And there we have proteins that recognize the structure of these neurotransmitters. We call those proteins receptors. They pick up the concentration of these neurotransmitters, get activated, and then the second nerve cell transports the packet of information further down the nerve. That's how this information transfer from one cell to another is working. And that's where problems can occur. Because as we see diseases like Alzheimer, but also in pre-Alzheimer status, in just simple everyday memory loss, we see that the effectiveness of this information transfer is being compromised. And this can have two reasons. One, we can have a limited production of neurotransmitters, so that there's just not simply enough of these messenger molecules around to transfer the information. That will be one way. The second way is that the receptor affinity for this neurotransmitter is being compromised, that it simply doesn't, is not so sensitive anymore. That's another issue that can happen in memory loss and in Alzheimer. That basically gives us two targets to think about when we want to improve memory, when we want to keep memory in a healthy state. One, we can think of increasing the neurotransmitter production. Second, we can increase the sensitivity of the receptors for the neurotransmitters. That gives us two strategies. And when we think about these, those are the two things that we do in Cognoblend Advanced Formula. On the one hand, we have included a component called phosphatidylcholine that is a building block of extra neurotransmitters to keep the concentration high. And second, there is an enzyme that once the neurotransmitters have done its job in our body, they're being broken down, like anything. Any molecule, any signaling molecule in our body, it's being produced, it's doing its job, and then it's being broken down, recycled, so to say. And there's an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase, that's the name of the enzyme, which our body makes to get rid of the acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, once it has done its job. Now, what we can do is make this breakdown enzyme less effective, inhibit it, slow it down. If we do that, we basically keep the amount of neurotransmitters being produced as high as possible and present for a longer time. It means that they can effectively activate multiple receptors and in that way increase the information transfer over the synaptic cleft. That is the whole concept of Cognoblend Advanced Formula. One hand, providing building blocks for neurotransmitters. Second, preventing them from being effectively broken down. And then, of course, there are other components which are very important in memory enhancement, which is keeping the blood flow to the brain very active. The brain is an enormous consumer of energy and oxygen. It works continuously, 24 hours a day. It needs a lot of blood flow. And as you can imagine, big arteries go up to the brain, but then split into very small microvessels. And those microvessels are, very sensitive. They need to be kept healthy. They need to be protected from dangerous free radical damage. And that's why we have specific components in a Cognoblend Advanced Formula that help us protect the integrity of the microvessels. And components that help us to relax those microvessels so that more blood can actually be reaching the brain. Now let me talk a little bit about the individual components. The most important component of Cognoblend Advanced Formula is huperzine A. Now huperzine A is a little phytonutrient, phytomolecule coming from a plant called Huperzia serrata. And this is a very well-known Chinese herbal medicine. It's been used for centuries, particularly for this area, for cognition improvement, for alertness, for preventing Alzheimer deterioration of the brain. And what this molecule is doing, it is an inhibitor of acetylcholine esterase. So it inhibits the breakdown process of these important neurotransmitters. And that is how it functions. It basically prevents the slowdown of the neurotransmitter effectiveness as we age, as we lose part of our memory, is being prevented because it simply blocks the breakdown process. It's a very special molecule, huperzine A, because if you go on Google and look and type it in, huperzine A, and read about it, you'll see that there's a lot of data out there, a lot of clinical studies out there available to prove that it actually does all these things that we say it does. Because there are a lot of data, a lot of clinical studies on Alzheimer, but also on memory improvement, also up all the way to the kid stage, where pupils in schools have been taking huperzine A, and studies have shown that it improves their mental alertness, that it improves their learning ability. There's a lot of clinical data out there, and it's very effective because, as you will see on the label of Cognoblend Advanced Formula, it is only 50 micrograms available in the product. 50 micrograms. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot because that's a sub-milligram, but that shows you its potency. That is the amount that has been used in studies and that has shown to have the effect. And that's a great indication that the molecule is highly effective in doing what it's supposed to do, because we only need about 50 micrograms of the product in the Cognoblend Advanced Formula. That's the most important ingredient. That's where Cognoblend Advanced Formula is resting on, huperzine A. The second ingredient is ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba, that's a well-known. We know this. This was also present in Cognoblend original formula. Ginkgo biloba is a blood flow enhancing product. It is an ingredient. It's from the leaves of a tree. If you go to Japan, you see a lot of ginkgo biloba trees. In fact, also I see them sometimes in the United States. And the leaves of those ginkgo biloba are harvested and are being extracted and standardized to a certain phytonutrient. And these phytonutrients stimulate the blood flow. They open up the vessels, particularly microvessels. They relax them so that blood can more easily flow through it. And it ensures that the brain has access to adequate nourishment and adequate oxygen, which are very important for correct brain functioning. That's what ginkgo biloba is doing. Gotu kola, the third ingredient in Cognoblend Advanced Formula. And this one also has the blood flow enhancing properties. That's great, but it has an additional effect, as been shown from in vitro research, in that it reduces the toxicity of beta-amyloid protein. Now, what is beta-amyloid protein? Beta-amyloid is a protein that forms a plaque inside our brain once we develop Alzheimer and dementia. So it's kind of a late-stage thing, but one of the clinical symptoms we see when people have dementia or Alzheimer is this buildup of a plaque, in this case not a heart disease plaque, but a plaque of a protein, starting to form in different parts of the brain. And this is a very highly toxic protein. It actually forms because of Alzheimer, but it propagates the disease even faster because it has its own toxicity effects for the brain. Now, Gotu kola has been shown to limit the toxicity of this protein in vitro, and that's why it has this great additional effect for late-stage memory impairment when we talk about Alzheimer. Then we have Bacopa monnieri. Bacopa monnieri, again, a great herb from the Indian Ayurvedic traditional medicine. What this one is doing is interfere, again, with the neurotransmitters, but in its own specific way. It increases the acetylcholine release. So where huperzine prevented the breakdown, Bacopa monnieri promotes the synthesis of the neurotransmitters. So that works in both ways, stimulating, again, the level of signaling molecules available to propagate the information over the nerve cells. It also increases the receptor sensitivity for neurotransmitters. So now we're covered on three sides. We have increased production, we have decreased breakdown, and we have increased sensitivity for the neurotransmitters. A very smart combination of three ingredients, all working from different angles to increase the neurotransmitter effectiveness. The fifth already in Cognoblend Advanced Formula is ginseng, Siberian ginseng. This is an adaptogen. Ginseng, of course, a lot of people take ginseng for its energy effect, for its increased feeling of well-being. It's a very normal, everyday supplement. But for Cognoblend Advanced Formula, it has specific effects that it is an adaptogen. An adaptogen means, in the herbal medicinal science, means a component that makes us better cope with stress. If there is stress, environmental stress, as we face every day, an adaptogen makes our body accept it and deal with it without bringing our body off balance. That is what an adaptogen is doing, and that is what ginseng is doing in this specific regard. It also has antioxidant properties. And then, finally, we have phosphatidylcholine, and that is the building block of the neurotransmitter. I already told you that in the beginning. Phosphatidylcholine comes from soy lecithin. That's the normal source of phosphatidylcholine, and it is a very big structural component in our body because it is part of every cell membrane. It's split off from the phosphatidylcholine once we eat it and is being put in a bodily pool. And this is a pool that our body utilizes to make the neurotransmitters. Choline is a building block of acetylcholine, the most important neurotransmitter. So this basically ensures that we have adequate supplies available to increase the neurotransmitter synthesis in our body. And that's important because we add ingredients that stimulate the neurotransmitter manufacturing. So we need to provide our body as well with the building blocks to do that. Then finally, we have in the product vitamin E and grapeseed, and these are two specific antioxidants for our vascular system. Vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin, fat-soluble antioxidant, protects the lipids. Makes sure that lipids are not being destroyed by free radicals, and that would be a big problem for the brain because, it would start to clog up part of the arteries going to the brain, particularly the microvessels. And grapeseed is a very specific antioxidant for small microvesicles in our brain. And as I said, the brain uses a lot of that because it uses a lot of oxygen, a lot of nutrients, so you want to keep the integrity of the microvessels, and grapeseed has been shown to do that. By the way, grapeseed is also very good for keeping the integrity of all small vesicles. For example, the retina. The retina, as you can imagine, has a lot of microvascular system in it, and grapeseed is very beneficial to keep that healthy. So if you have diabetes, and for diabetes, for example, the retina is under particular stress, grapeseed is a very good addition to your daily dietary supplement regimen. That completes Cognoblend Advanced Formula. Now, why did we change? Why did we update the formula? Well, first of all, we always believe that we should have formulas that meet the latest scientific information, that match the latest scientific information. If there's new information coming out that a product is going to be stronger, it's going to be better, we want to put that in the product. That is a responsibility we have at the Research and Development Department of Unicity. We utilize the newest and best information and provide products that match that information. That's why we felt we needed to upgrade Cognoblend Advanced Formula. But there's a second reason. The second reason is that the original Cognoblend was very effective for particularly very old people because it was really focused on Alzheimer. There's a great overlap in Cognoblend and the Cognoblend Advanced Formula, but the key ingredient, which was cat's claw in Cognoblend, and which is huperzine in Cognoblend Advanced Formula, is very different. Cat's claw, what that product was doing was effectively inhibiting the formation of the beta amyloid protein plaques, which I talked about a little bit. So that prevented the plaque formation. It's very important, but it's only important for Alzheimer patients because that is when this beta amyloid protein is going to be a problem when you have Alzheimer. And, it's very important, and I don't want to say that that's something we don't care about. No, Alzheimer, that's a problem. But the product was therefore not the optimal product for the whole population. We believe that most people would buy Cognoblend for memory impairment, for loss of short-term memory, to keep alert, to keep mental fitness, and not necessarily to treat, if you may say, Alzheimer's disease. And that's why we felt the switch was needed. We needed to have a product that basically covered a bigger chunk of the population. We haven't forgotten the Alzheimer people because the product has clear and very clear benefits, clinically proven benefits for Alzheimer's disease with the huperzine and the neurotransmitter, preventing of the neurotransmitter breakdown. So we are covered there. But now the product has a stronger effect for multiple things, like memory impairment, like cognition loss. And that's why we have Cognoblend Advanced Formula. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening in this week to the BioSlife Franchise Product Training Call. I hope you learned again something, and please dial in next time. Thank you. Bye.